Good, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Can you see us?
Yes, let me just change one thing on my desktop here. Yeah, can you see me okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Nice.
All right. So, for those of you, this is Dr. Mike T. Nelson. You can leave that on, unless it's hard to see. This room, Mike, is terrible because if we cut the lights off, it is really dark in here and you can't see us. If we leave them on, you're a little washed out on the projector.
Let's see. Let me try turning the overhead light on and the one in the back off. See if that helps.
We'll try and make it like we're interrogating you.
I know, it's just
Let's just say it looks better.
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
Wow. So much better.
Is that better?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Modern technology.
We all want to know what you're drinking now.
Oh, it's a red hibiscus tea. And I have my We Are Science shirt on too, so I'm all ready.
I thought you were drinking something a little more enjoyable, but
Uh,
you're behind us, so.
I could. That would be more fun.
All right, so why don't you, Mike, or Dr. Nelson, why don't you tell us a little bit about your educational background and bridge that into what you are currently doing, because you have an interesting story.
Yeah, so the semi-short version is I did a Bachelor of Arts in Natural Science quite a long time ago. And I always thought that I loved physiology, but I never knew what to do with it. So I used to take apart stuff in my parents' house, never put it back together. And I had a 10-scale radio-controlled car that I would spend hours just modifying and race and all sorts of things. So everyone's like, oh, well, you like physiology, and you obviously looks like you like engineering stuff. You should go into biomedical engineering. And I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. So I did a undergrad, a Bachelor of Arts in Natural Science from St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota. And then went to Michigan Tech, which is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so the piece of land above Wisconsin that's not quite Canada. And at the time, they didn't really have biomedical engineering. It wasn't really well known. So I did 2 years of work there, and then I did 2.5 years to do a master's in mechanical engineering. And my research was actually on biomedical engineering, and it was for, the time they told me it was for collision avoidance systems on cars. And later it turned out to be that the military was making its own ray gun. And that's actually what it was on. So if you've seen anything called the active denial system, it's this super huge microwave transmitter that they point at a crowd of people, and it feels like your skin is being burnt by a light bulb. So you disperse and you get out of the way. And at the time it was so classified, they didn't tell me it was classified until about 5 years later. So I did a computer-generated model on that using simulated monkeys. So we had the simulated monkey in front of a big transmitter, in front of a fan, not fan, sweaty monkey, not sweaty monkey, all this kind of stuff. So I finished all that and said, I'm never going back to school. I'm done. I actually started working in the medical device industry in cardiology products. And about 2 years after that, I just started taking classes again. I was in the PhD program for biomedical engineering at the University of Minnesota. And I actually got all the classwork done except 2 classes and dropped out of there because I didn't want to do any more math. I go over to the physiology department, and literally like the first meeting I ever had, my advisor comes in, we're sitting at a table. He's like, okay, I've got 2 new projects. One's on heart rate variability, one's on metabolic flexibility, and they both involve math. And he's kind of looking around the table at everyone because in exercise phys, in general, you don't take very much math at all. And I'm sitting all the way on the right-hand side, the last he looks at, and he points at me and he goes, oh, math boy, these are your new projects for the next, in this case, turned out to be 7.5 years. So I ended up doing more math-based stuff in physiology. And so after I finished that, I actually left the medical device industry almost a year ago now, and I've been running my own business part-time for 10 years off and on. And then the past year, I've just been doing my own business and a little bit of teaching.
Can you tell us a little bit about who in here has heard of heart rate variability? Can you give us a quick 101 of heart rate variability and in terms of fitness, what it's useful for?
Sure. So heart rate variability is, the classical definition is your heart rate will change just a little bit when you're at rest. So one beat to the next will be just a little bit different. And that's what they call variability analysis. So it's a little bit different than the average. But what that tells you based on the physiology is this little bit of fine scale variability is a marker for health. And the heart is primarily driven by two systems within the autonomic nervous system, which you guys have probably covered. You've got the parasympathetic on one side, which is the rest and digest branch of the nervous system. And you've got the sympathetic on the other side, which is the fight or flight, potentially freeze or faint, right? There's actually a fainting goat that faints when it gets like super stressed. It just passes out with all its legs up in the air. So heart rate variability tells you the percentage of where you are in each one of those systems. So if you were, let's say, doing a lot of heavy training, you find that, oh, I'm becoming a little bit more sympathetic driven. I take a few days off, I maybe do some meditation or some relaxation stuff. Oh, now I'm a little bit more parasympathetic. So it gives you a status of the autonomic nervous system.
And what is that useful for in terms of monitoring clients or athletes? Because you use it a lot in your own practice.
I do. The nice part is that now you can literally, like everyone has a little fancy smartphone. There's a program you can run on the phone that there's been 3 or 4 pieces of literature now showing that it is accurate, can be reproduced again. So when I did research on this in the lab, the equipment we had to measure it was probably around like 15 grand, somewhere around there, in the thousands of dollars for sure. You know, now for like less than $100 or cheaper than that, if you don't need to buy a heart rate strap, you can actually run it off of your phone. So a lot of the clients I have are primarily online or distance based. So they'll get up in the morning, they'll run the little measurement, takes about 2 to 3 minutes, and then they'll send me the data. So I know that the training they're doing, they may have some lifestyle components. And then each day I have this little marker of where the stress of their nervous system is at. So if I see all of a sudden they're getting really, really stressed, okay, you know, are you not sleeping? Is your nutrition off? Or maybe we need to change something on your training. So the nice part is it gives you the response of their body and their nervous system to what you're actually doing. And that's usually the hardest thing to get, especially in an online environment where you're not watching them walk or move or train or that type of thing when you're there with them. So I found that that's been super helpful for that.
How does stress affect training and reaching your goals, whether it's strength and increased muscle mass or weight loss?
I usually find that in general, if your stress levels are super high, it impedes both of them. So on the strength area, if you're doing super low rep training, for most people, their next day, their body will view that as a little bit more of a stressor. Some of the literature would say, 24 or 48 hours to recover from that. I've seen it potentially be even a little bit longer. Also for more of the fat loss side, at some level, if people have a super stressful life, it's much harder for them to make good decisions on a day-by-day basis. For example, we know that sleep deprivation not only screws up with how their body uses different fuels, but it messes with their ability to make good decisions, right? So if anyone's been super stressed out, haven't had enough sleep, they're probably not thinking, oh boy, chicken breasts and broccoli, right? They're thinking, oh, what's the nearest amount of food that I can eat? So it can actually mess with both of those by a little bit different mechanisms.
And how do you use heart rate variability to monitor that?
Yeah, so each morning, they, like I said, they do the measurement and they send it in. So I'll have their resting heart rate, I'll have their heart rate variability numbers, and I'll know the trend or the pattern over time. And then on the app, they also report things like fatigue, muscle soreness, sleep. These are all just self-report each morning when they get up. So I can then take that and look and see, oh boy, you became a little bit more stressful here. Oh wow, your sleep actually dropped off for the past, 3 to 4 days. So I've got a pretty good kind of big picture idea of not only are they becoming more and more stressful, and then what is maybe the underlying cause for that.
Cool. These guys had to go out into the community, and they had to recruit a client to train for the next 4 weeks.
Nice. Look,
Yeah.
they look excited.
And so 2 weeks from today, they're going to meet with that person for the initial intake, the initial consultation. Now, most of your stuff is done online. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you treat that first meeting with the client, whether it's face-to-face or online, and then impart some wisdom onto these guys.
Sure. So the big thing I do now, there's a couple things. So one, I want them to fill out, the standard paperwork, which I'm sure you've talked about, and the PAR-Q and release form, and all the kind of normal stuff. But the other things I have them fill out is what historically they've done. So one of them is just a 3-day dietary recall. And I actually want them to do that going forward, not necessarily recall the past 3 days. Because usually the recall is not very good. And the other hard part is I had to add a little line on there that says, don't impress me. If you ate it or drank it, just write it down. Because people will always kind of want to win the test, right? They don't want to look bad. It's a weird thing, right? So if you hire someone to clean your house, a lot of people will clean their house before the person comes over to clean your house. Well, I don't want it to look bad. It's like, really? And I do the same thing, right? I brush my teeth and floss real religiously before I go to the dentist. Oh, I don't want the dentist to think I'm a bad person because I didn't brush my teeth, right? So people do the same thing with nutrition intake forms. So I tell them, just try not to change anything. And I know they probably will, which is okay. So I want to know where they're at with just nutrition choices and macronutrients and things of that nature. But I also want them to be aware of what they're actually doing. Because a lot of times people just are more subconscious to what they're actually eating. So when they have to write something down or take a picture or something like that, they actually realize, oh wow, they look at the end of the day, wow, I do eat a lot of Cheetos. I didn't realize that, right? So when they come in, I'm more interested in not necessarily where they were at, because that's useful, but I'll ask them, when you did this, what did you find that jumped out at you that you were not previously aware of? For some people, it's like, oh, I drink a lot of Mountain Dew or energy drinks or whatever it is. I'm more interested in what is their level of awareness to it than actually a lot of times what they actually write down. And then the mistake I made in the past was to try to change what I thought was like the biggest factor. So if someone comes in and let's say their protein is just horrible, it's like 30 grams a day or something. In the past, I would say, oh my gosh, you need to eat more protein and rattle off all sorts of literature, or I would take books like this that you've co-authored and throw that at them and stuff. But now I'll ask them, okay, what were you aware of? And what do you think you're willing to change? And if it's something that's pretty basic and small, but they're willing to change it, I'll actually start there. Because I want them to change the easiest thing first, not the hardest thing. Even if the harder things may have a bigger physiologic impact, I want them to get used to doing new habits, being successful with the habit, in essence, getting sort of smaller wins going forward. Exact same thing with exercise. If one of the questions I would ask them is, what, in terms of your exercise, do you think is responsible for most of your past success? And if they tell me the craziest thing, like, oh man, it's definitely standing on a Bosu ball with one leg doing dumbbell curls with my left arm, I may think that is like the stupidest exercise I've ever heard of and could justify with literature and all this kind of stuff. But if they currently believe that that is part of their success, as sad as it sounds, it'll actually show up in their program, right? Because if I don't put it in there and I ask them that question, they're going to look through their program and be like, oh, this guy's an idiot. I told him that this is the best thing that's helpful for me, And that dummy didn't even put it in my program. I'm not gonna listen to anything he says, right? So over time, my goal then is to get them to do less dumb stuff. But initially, just from a buy-in standpoint, I'll probably still have it in their program. So I always tell people it's fine to, in essence, sort of rig the system to start, right? Where can you get a couple small wins to get them to be compliant and then to get them going forward? So I'd rather have them get good habits of changing something, and then I can even later substitute in stuff that's a little bit better. So I'd say those are probably the two main things I do that's a little bit different than what you may have heard.
What is your general clientele like?
It varies a lot from currently sort of average, not in a bad way, but housewives to people with busy families to some more competitive athletes, some competitive athletes in CrossFit. In the past, I've worked with physique competitors, so natural competitors for bodybuilding and figure, semi-pro kayaker from Denmark. I worked with a lady, did a couple sessions who ran in the Olympics, in Chinese Olympics a couple years ago. It's a pretty wide mix. And I found that there's actually more crossover between that sort of wide population than you would imagine. But it's nice because it gives you a good background and different things to try out.
What are some fundamentals in all of your training programming?
Biggest thing I tell people is my poor students get so tired of listening to me yammer on this all the time, but making sure they understand the principles. So if I had to pick just a couple basic principles, one of them is adaptation, right? So you're always adapting to something, right? So if you're sitting in the chair listening to me yammer on right now, your hip flexors are getting a little bit, shorter, things of that nature. You're adapting to being in a seated position. So adaptation is not good or bad per se, it's just an ongoing process. And what we do determines if it's sort of a positive or negative adaptation. Another one would be like the SET principle, so specific adaptation to imposed demand. So if you want to get better at doing back squats, then you should probably back squat, right? That seems like it's the most simple one ever, but it's kind of lost on a lot of programs. You'll see like a program, increase your deadlift by 50 pounds. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, how come I never deadlift? What doesn't make sense? The flip side of that is positive transfer. So maybe I can only deadlift specifically, 2 days a week, but maybe I'm going to do a Romanian deadlift or stiff-legged deadlift. And I'm hoping that as I get better at that, it'll positively transfer to my deadlift. Or if you're working with a track and field athlete, maybe as their back squat goes up, maybe they can actually run faster. So that would be a positive adaptation from squatting to sprinting. So those are kind of the big ones. I always tell people, make sure you understand the principles. Obviously overload being a big one too, so volume, density, intensity. And just make sure that those are in your program and you'll probably do all right.
Well, what is your, if you have such a thing, what does a typical day look like for you?
It kind of varies a lot. So let's see, if I look at my schedule for like today, I do some coaching calls too with Eat to Perform. I'm actually the Director of Education for the Mindset Performance Institute. So I had calls with them today. I had two potential client calls. Did some emails. So I have a newsletter I send out. I'm trying to send that out on a daily basis. Did some client work in the afternoon and then lifted right before this. So it kind of varies a lot. The teaching I do for Globe University is online. So most of the stuff I do for that is on Wednesdays and then just general office hours during the week. I do some training currently for one of the local gyms here. So it kind of varies a fair amount from one day to the next. But one thing I've been trying to do is actually write out my first 2 to 3 hours every day on a piece of paper, which sounds kind of crazy, but it's easy to get distracted by everything else that's going on and actually write down really, really basic stuff. Like today is literally the first one says, get up. The next one is do heart rate variability measurement, drink water, go for a walk. And and then all the little tasks I would have to do after that. So if I have a morning like I had today where I just feel kind of slow, I don't really want to work on anything, I just have to look down and go, okay, here's the next item I need to do, here's the next item, here's the next item. So that if everything else just goes to heck the rest of the day, I've gotten 2 hours or 3 hours done of the things I absolutely need to get done to kind of move everything forward.
Do you guys have any questions? I've been asking a lot of questions. Something you're going to do with your client, something in regards to your own training or nutrition, something you've seen.
Nothing to do with any of that, but what's his business?
Can you tell us more about your business?
Yeah, so currently for things I do to generate income, I teach online for Globe University. So this quarter I've got 4 classes. Last quarter I had 2. I used to teach for them in person, but all the stuff I do now is just entirely online for them. I did the coaches course and an ebook and do some coaching for Eat to Perform. And then I'm, like I said, Director of Education for the Mindset Performance Institute, where there I do more research-based kind of neurology type stuff. So trying to make sure that all the messaging and everything they put out is consistent and that there's actual, if we say that, research says blah, 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 there is actual research, on that so that the messaging is consistent and it's actually based on something. Then I help design some sort of, new programs we have coming out. We have a mind-body certification that will be coming out sometime next year, and we've got level 1 and level 2 right now, which I helped create with that. I've got other sort of projects going on. I'm working on a product right now for heart rate variability. I work with Coach Cal Dietz at the University of Minnesota, helping him write a second print book, Triphasic Training 2. And then I have my own online clients. I do have a few clients that are in person or locally, but usually not too much, maybe only just like a couple per week at the very most. And I don't know if I forgot anything else, but I think that covers covers most of it. So pretty varied, to say the least.
How do you build trust with your clients? Because I know you say you have to put don't impress me and just say whatever you do. But how do you trust your clients that they'll tell you, oh, I've done this and that as far as workouts and I've eaten exactly this instead of saying, oh, I drink water all day when they really drink soda?
Yeah. So how do I? Let's see, 2 parts. So how do I build trust, and how do I trust that they're telling me what's actually going on? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say the building trust thing, most of the clients I have actually kind of probably come through my newsletter. So I try to do a daily newsletter, trying to do a little bit better on that, which I think is good. So if you're listening from a marketing standpoint, it's an easy way to get content. It's pretty easy to figure out how to use the systems to run it. And you know how many people opened it, how many people read it, that type of thing. So people usually that come in have a pretty good idea of my background and that type of thing. So they, oddly enough, usually know a lot more about me than I know about them. So there's usually a little bit of trust already, just the fact that they hired me to help them with training. But simple as it sounds, just for building trust, and it just actually care about what they're doing. I know that seems really basic, but I think in the past I was probably a little bit too hung up on them executing everything and making sure everything, followed every principle, and those things are important. But, even stuff like just caring about what's going on in their life. So if I haven't heard from a client, my general email to them is literally, hey, how's it going? I haven't heard from you in a while, just wanted to make sure you were okay. Or in the past, I'd be like, hey, how come your training thing isn't updated? Oh, I saw you didn't send me your HRV. What's going on? And then they feel bad because they're like, oh my God, I haven't done anything. And for all I know, I had some clients this summer that their gym their house got flooded in Texas. That's why I haven't heard from them in a while. So there could be some catastrophic thing that happened. Or a lot of times they'll find it's a lifestyle type stress. And if you add more stress to them about, hey, why isn't this done? It tends to freak them out a little bit. Which is a weird fine line because you want them to be compliant and you want them to obviously do the things you're recommending. But sometimes you have to modify them depending upon changes in their stress and things of that nature too. So I would say that's probably the things that I do. If it's an in-person session, there's some it's kind of a little bit more woo-woo type stuff. There's a good book called Motivational Interviewing, and there's other different forms, but in essence, if you try to just mirror a little bit of what they're doing, that's the one way you can sort of unconsciously build rapport. Not necessarily in a slimy used car salesman kind of way, but if they're sitting in one position, you probably want to sit in a similar position, right? So for an extreme example, if someone comes in and they're facing me and I turn around and face the other direction, they're going to be like, oh my God, this guy's not even paying any attention to me at all. Which is funny because I went to a concert years ago. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the band Tool. The lead singer Maynard had a side project, and he swore that if he went out on stage and someone took a picture of him, that he was going to do the whole show with his back to the crowd. That's actually what he did. It was very odd. But the whole time you're just thinking, no, this just feels weird, right? So if you try to, just mirror a little bit of their position and what they're doing, that can also help too. I mean, there's sort of schools of thought, I think, that take that a little bit too far and it becomes creepy. But just pay attention to kind of, what they're doing, what their tone of voice is. If they're speaking a little bit slower, it may be in your best interest to speak a little bit slower and, not like a chipmunk on speed, so.
What other questions do you have?
Don't all jump at once.
Tell us a little about metabolic flexibility, how you measure it, and what it means for us and or our clients.
Sure. So metabolic flexibility is basically using the right fuel at the right time. So like you guys probably already know, if you're at rest or low intensity exercise, you would probably want to use fat as going to be your best fuel source. If you're going to do a high intensity session or weight training session, you would then want to shift to use carbohydrates to get the highest level of performance. So metabolic flexibility is how you can use the right fuel at the right time. So using as much carbohydrates as you can during high intensity, highest level of fat you can at low intensity, and then how fast can you switch back and forth between those two? For example, if you're doing, say, old school, training Bill Starr, like 5x5 for deadlifts. So I probably like deadlifts, that's in every example. After you finish your 5th rep of your deadlift, let's say it's after your first set, during that time you're executing the lift, you're primarily using mostly glycogen. Yeah, you're using some ATP, CP, and those things too. But for simplification, primarily carbohydrates. And as soon as you set the weight down, you actually shift to primarily using fat during the rest period. Start your second set, go back to using carbs. So you're switching back and forth. So that'd be an example of exercise of how you'd be using metabolic flexibility. And we know that in a disease process like type 2 diabetes, we actually become very metabolically inflexible. So in general, you've got a higher amount of carbohydrates coming in, and the body isn't able to handle them that well. So you've got sort of messed up carbohydrate metabolism, and the body, to try to make up for that, keeps putting out more and more and more insulin in order to get glucose the heck out of the bloodstream and into tissues. So fat, glycogen, muscular triglycerides, through the liver for DNL, whatever. Just get it the heck out of the bloodstream. But over time, your baseline of insulin becomes so high that it actually starts to impair your body's ability to use fat. So you can think of insulin as like a fuel selector switch. So as insulin is higher, pushes your body to use more carbs. Insulin is lower, pushes your body to use more fat. And a type 2 diabetic becomes metabolically inflexible. They've got poor use of carbohydrates. Their baseline level of insulin gets higher and higher. And then now they actually start losing the ability to use fat. So they get basically squished from both ends of the spectrum. So they're not very metabolically flexible. So I think that it's useful as a marker for health, and I think also to a little bit lesser degree performance too.
How do you measure that with your clients, whether it's face-to-face or
Yeah, so if you're in the lab, you can use the metabolic cart. You guys are probably familiar with that. So a big fancy cart where you exhale into a little tube, goes into the cart, and it tells you what's called your RQ or your RER. And that's the percentage of fat versus carbohydrates. So if you're just in a low intensity, your RER, respiratory exchange ratio, should be around 0.7 to maybe 0.75. So that would be mostly using fat. If we start having you do high amounts of intervals, or we give you like a carbohydrate solution, we'll see that your RER goes up to potentially around 1. So 1 would be 100% use of carbohydrates. So via an exercise test in a lab, you can measure how people transition via the crossover theory from one fuel to the next. You could also measure where they're at during rest. So I had one person in the lab when I was at the University of Minnesota. She came in and we just did a slight warm up, and I'm looking at her RER and it was around like 0.92. So she's primarily using carbohydrates, even though she's just doing very low intensity work. And I asked her, I said, maybe you just, forgot to fast. She's like, no, I did a fast. I was like, all right. I said, well, do you mind coming in next week? We'll repeat the test. Machine was all cal. The rest of the test went fine. Comes back in a week later, exact same thing. So her metabolism, for various reasons, was actually pushed to using more carbohydrates, even though she was at rest, right? So she's basically a little bit skewed. So if you don't have fancy equipment, what are some sort of surrogate tests you can do? There's some, they're not the best, but the two that I use is how long can you do a period of fasting and still feel pretty good, especially for just day-to-day activities or low-intensity stuff. That's a rough indication of how well you can use fat. On the flip side, if you have a whole bunch of carbohydrates, how do you feel after that? So if we give you a whole bunch of carbohydrates and you feel like you want to take a nap for 4 hours, I would say that's probably not the best. And again, those are pretty crude indicators. There's not a ton of research to back up either one of those, but it'll give you an approximation on both ends of the spectrum.
Any questions? Okay. Do you do anything with people in person right now?
I do a little bit. I do some movement sessions, some gait sessions, some training sessions. Not that many, 1 to 2 a week if I'm in town. I kind of cut back on a fair amount of it just because of scheduling with travel and everything else. It just got to be kind of a nightmare. And then I actually have all the equipment and everything in my garage. So I used to work years ago, worked at a gym training people for a while, and the gym actually filed bankruptcy. It wasn't real fun. So I went there to train myself the night before, and there's a big sign on the door, hey, we filed bankruptcy. If you want your money back, please write to this address in Iowa. They never got me my money back. So then I'm chasing clients around different towns, trying to train them. So I took the couple clients I had, gave them a pretty good deal and said, I'll give you 80% off for the next year. The catch is you'd have to pay in cash the first part of January. And 2 of them said, yeah, I'll do that. So I took that and some money I'd saved and bought just a real basic power rack, bar, bench, made a little platform on the bottom and trap bar, bought a bunch of used weights. And so yes, that's all I had initially. And that was probably 6 years ago now, I think. So now I've got all sorts of stuff from kettlebells to axles to tires to Atlas stones to all sorts of fun stuff.
What kind of motivational tips can you give these guys for working with their clients in person?
Motivation, how so? Like motivating clients or motivating them, or?
Let's start with clients, and then let's talk about motivating them as well. You have
Sure.
a very good grasp of the psychology behind training clients.
Yeah.
Them to do what you want them to do and what they should be doing.
Yeah, I find that I highly dislike most of the motivational stuff that comes out. So I think it goes back to what is their mindset. So if they have a very dynamic, kind of growth-centered mindset, the standard things you see like on Facebook of, someone lifting some heavy weight and it just says, go to the gym and train, or train hard, or whatever the sort of weird sayings are. I think for those people, it can work okay. But to the average person who has more of a fixed mindset, or let's say a not as good mindset, I think those things are actually incredibly demotivating. And I think in the fitness field, we do a good job of just talking to sort of the already converted, and not a very good job of talking to the people who are really just, scared of going into a gym. They're tried a bunch of different things in the past. They're already convinced that they're probably going to fail again. So, telling them, just get to the gym is just, not really motivational. So I think it goes back from a client perspective. I try to differentiate between, do they have maybe a dynamic or a fixed mindset? A lot of that you can look at the language that they use. So for example, if I have a client who, let's say, is trying to deadlift 405 for the first time. So we write a cool program for them, we've got them doing all that kind of stuff, and it comes to test day. And they go to test, and their previous max was, let's say, 385, and today they only get 395. So they did better than what they did before, and then I'll ask them, what did they think of the test? And I'll actually listen to see what kind of language they use. So a good, let's say, dynamic mindset would be, well, it's 10 pounds better than what I did before. It's not quite where I wanted to go, but I think I need to work on, this, and that, or if I can get, sleep or stress or add another type of thing to my program. They'll usually list for you different options of what they can do that will get them to their goal. Someone who may go through the exact same situation, but has a very fixed mindset, will kind of take the other path, and they'll kind of be like, I can never lift 405. Oh, that's so heavy. I've never been able to do this before, and every time I did, I got injured. And it's very much, I'm not able to do it, and then here's a laundry list of reasons why I can't do it. So I think differentiating those two mindsets is the first step. The second step would be trying to get them to change it on an unconscious level. So the first step with that would just be awareness. So then our next conversation would usually be, okay, so you do realize that you were doing good and now you're kind of in a fixed mindset. And in essence, you've listed all the reasons why you can't do it. And just try to get them out of that a little bit. A lot of times it's as simple as just making them aware of it. Because a lot of people will repeat the same patterns in speech all the time, and they don't even realize it. The other key word that I listen for is the word should. So I think a lot of people kind of should all over themselves. Oh, I should do this, I should do that, oh, I should have done this. And a lot of times that's just, basically setting themselves up for failure in that regards. So I think with client sets, you have to change their unconscious mindset is the biggest thing. And then all the other stuff in terms of compliance and everything else become a lot easier. And most people realize this, right? You probably worked with someone who was very compliant, did everything you said, and then you've worked with someone else who just wouldn't do anything that you told them to do. Another little thing that's helpful on that too is that the adult brain really can't process a negative very well. So if I tell everyone in class, okay, don't think of a pink elephant, what did you think of?
Pink elephant.
Pink elephant, right? But I told you don't think of the pink elephant, right? But your brain has a hard time processing the negative. We know what it means, but when we visualize it, we still think of a pink elephant, right? So if I asked you, how tall are the windows in your living room? You're like, well, that's kind of a weird question. But you'd still be able to answer it because you would visualize yourself standing in your living room and go, okay, yeah, they're about 4 feet off the ground, right? So your brain thinks very visually, which is a very efficient means of storing information. So I had a guy who, we did his dietary recall, and he kept eating, sleeves of Oreos. And this was a long time ago when I first started. I thought, he's a little bit overweight. This is easy. I don't know why everyone has so many problems with all this fitness stuff. I'm like, stop eating Oreos. And he's like, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And you can imagine how successful that was. We would have these arguments every week. He'd come back in, and he started eating more Oreos. I'm going, oh my God, what's going on? He agrees that this is a problem. He's aware that he's doing it, but yet he keeps doing it. So eventually I realized that, just like the don't think of a pink elephant, we had all these discussions about Oreos, and all his brain keeps thinking is Oreos. So eventually, once I figured this out, it was a little bit slow, I said, okay, I don't care about Oreos anymore. It's like, really? You can eat as many damn Oreos as you want. I don't care. I said, the caveat is, you have to eat, about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So you can have Oreos, but you have to eat, 20 to 40 grams of protein first. He's like, oh, okay, this is going to be great. Comes back a couple weeks later, he ate dramatically less Oreos than what he did before. He's like, oh, I'm full all the time. I don't know what's going on, right? Because protein's very filling. So I was getting him to focus on something that was better, and lo and behold, he lost some weight too. So I always think with clients, what is the thing that I want them to do, and try to emphasize that. So if I'm trying to get them maybe to eat less carbohydrates or less other things, I'll be like, okay, eat more protein, eat more fiber, eat more vegetables, drink more water. It's always more a list of do's, not necessarily a huge list of don'ts. So I found that from a motivational standpoint helps too, because you're giving them the thing that you want them to focus on. They can keep track of it, and then move forward on that too. And what was the other question about motivation for students?
Yeah, how, as a personal trainer, how can you stay motivated? Or let's say you have a difficult client, or someone who's always like down, has a negative mindset. How do you kind of not let that affect your ability to do your job?
Yeah, that's something that's taken me quite a while. It's actually a skill set to not let that other person's state or mood become your state and mood. And so, for example, I've done a fair amount of work with clients who have some movement issues, some pain, and I actually stopped doing it because I would feel like I needed to get inside their body, so to speak, and figure out where all their movement was coming from. And if I couldn't solve their issue in a short amount of time, I would drive myself bananas trying to figure out what it was. And then I would get kind of cranky, and I'd walk around trying to emulate their movement patterns, and then I would feel worse. And so eventually I just kind of stopped dealing with those people, not because they were bad or anything like that, because I couldn't control my own state. I was letting their state become mine. And it's still something I still have to work on, that you can provide everything and do everything and do things to help them, but at the end of the day, they still have to put forth the effort. The example I use is kind of like with Oprah. Oprah in theory could hire the best trainer, could hire a chef to follow her around every day, could do whatever she needed to do in order to lose weight. But at the end of the day, she still has to go through and do the effort, lift the weights, eat the food, all that kind of stuff. So even in a situation where you could have the most quote-unquote perfect means, it's still up to that person at the end of the day to go forward and do it. And training is a really weird thing, because a lot of times your reputation is based on what you do with clients, but it's also how well your clients actually comply, which is a really kind of a little weird thing too. So I think trying to learn, especially mindset stuff, is very helpful. If you get stuck, talk to other, clients, or other trainers, coaches, professors, and it's hard, but not necessarily take it that you're a bad person now. Instead, I need to try something else to try to get through this person. And a buddy of mine, even a while ago, I was complaining to him that I had a client. I just felt like I couldn't really get through. Nothing was working quite well. And he's like, well, you're doing the best you can, and reality is you're not her mom. I'm like, oh, yeah. So it's a line between doing the best you can, just trying to do better, trying different things, but also realizing at the end of the day, there's only so much that you can possibly control. And you're not going to show up at their door with a cattle prod and make them lift weights, right? And you could maybe, but there's a limit as to how far you can actually go to do something.
Any last questions? All right. some just, I don't know, all these guys are going to graduate or hopefully graduate in May. Right.
Nice.
So, some general life wisdom to impart onto them.
Oh, general
It's-
life wisdom. I would say the two big things are just, do what you enjoy. That seems simple, but if you're doing something every day that you don't enjoy at all, probably want to think, oh, what am I doing, right? So if you're doing things that you enjoy, it doesn't really seem like work then. And there's always things you kind of have to do that you may not enjoy, but I always try to think, how can I do more of the things that I enjoy and less the things I don't enjoy? And trying to structure everything in that direction. Which is why I chose not to teach at a standard university. I enjoyed the teaching, I loved the research, I loved all that stuff, but I personally didn't like the schedule and everything else that went with it, so I decided not to. And the other part too is just to, I guess, stay curious and always continue learning. I mean, it's a never-ending process. The more stuff I learn, the more stuff I realize I don't know anything about at all. I spent some time with Thomas Myers, who's done a lot of Anatomy Trains books, and he had a good quote that I think he said, as the depth of my knowledge increases, the horizon of my ignorance expands. So the more you learn, the more you realize there's a lot of stuff you don't know anything about, and that's okay. It's okay not to know a lot of stuff about other things. And by virtue of getting really good in one area, you have to get not very good in a whole bunch of other areas. And that's okay.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
See you, I'm gonna talk to you soon, December 1st.
Yeah. Sounds good. See you guys.
Bye. Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.